November 17, 1954, at 2:14 p.m., inside a cramped backstage dressing room at the Grand Ole Opry's Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the lingering smell of hair pomade. A 19-year-old Elvis Aaron Presley sat on a wooden folding chair, his hands shaking so badly he could barely button the pearl snaps on his pink and black Western shirt. He had exactly $4.37 in his pocket, a half-tank of gas in the borrowed 1951 Plymouth outside, and approximately 11 minutes before the most important audition of his young life. His pomade-slicked hair, combed into that distinctive ducktail that would later become iconic, was already starting to rebel against the Nashville humidity. Beads of sweat formed at his temples, not from the heat, but from the kind of bone-deep terror that only comes when everything you've ever wanted hangs by the thinnest possible thread. Elvis had driven 314 miles from Memphis, stopping twice to vomit from nerves at roadside gas stations. His mother Gladys had pressed a crumpled $5 bill into his palm that morning, money she'd saved from taking in laundry, whispering, "Show them what you got, baby." The Ryman Auditorium wasn't just any venue. It was the mother church of country music, the place where careers were either born or buried. Every Saturday night, WSM Signal carried the Grand Ole Opry to millions of radios across America. This wasn't some high school talent show or county fair. This was the apex, the mountaintop, the place where Hank Williams had stood, where Ernest Tubb commanded respect, where the very soul of American music lived and breathed. At exactly 2:25 p.m., a stagehand with a clipboard knocked twice and said the four words that made Elvis's stomach drop into his shoes. "You're up, Memphis boy." The walk from that dressing room to the stage was 47 steps. Elvis counted every single one, his legs feeling like they were made of water, his guitar case banging against his thigh with each unsteady stride. Jim Denny was the man who ran the Grand Ole Opry like his own personal kingdom. He sat in the third row center section, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Elvis's family made in 3 months. Denny had been the talent manager at the Opry for 7 years, and in that time he'd become the most feared and respected gatekeeper in country music. His word could launch careers or destroy them before they even began. He had a reputation for being able to smell commercial viability from 1,000 yards away, and his rejections were legendary for their brutal honesty. Elvis stepped into the harsh stage lights, squinting against their intensity. The auditorium stretched out before him, vast and mostly empty except for Denny and 2 assistants who didn't even look up from their paperwork. The microphone stood there like a judge waiting to pass sentence. Elvis's fingers fumbled with his guitar strap, and for one horrifying moment he thought he might drop the instrument entirely. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the cavernous space like a confession. "What are you going to sing for us?" Denny's voice was flat, already bored, already dismissive. He didn't even use Elvis's name, just addressed him like he was applicant number 47 in a day full of dreamers who didn't belong. "Blue Moon of Kentucky, sir," Elvis managed, his voice cracking slightly on the word sir. What happened next would be burned into Elvis's memory with the kind of clarity that only comes from moments of absolute humiliation. He started to sing, but it wasn't the traditional arrangement that Bill Monroe had made famous. Elvis's version had a rhythm, a beat, something wild and untamed that bubbled up from somewhere deep in his chest. His hips started to move just slightly at first, then with more conviction. It was involuntary, like his body was possessed by the music itself. Denny's face transformed from boredom to something else, disgust, maybe, or disbelief. He held up his hand exactly 93 seconds into the performance. "That's enough." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elvis had ever heard. It stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 7 or 8 seconds. Denny stood up, smoothed his tie, and delivered his verdict with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. "Son, you're not right for the Opry, you're not right for country music. That hip-shaking, that rhythm you got, it's not music, it's a gimmick, it's noise. You can't sing worth a damn, and that movement thing you're doing, it's vulgar, it's embarrassing." He paused, seeming to consider whether to continue, then added the words that would echo in Elvis's head for years to come. "My advice, stick to driving trucks, boy. It's honest work for someone like you." Elvis's face burned so hot he thought his skin might actually catch fire. His throat constricted like someone had wrapped their hands around it. The guitar suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. One of Denny's assistants actually laughed, a short, sharp bark that bounced off the walls. "Someone like you." The words hung in the air like a curse. Not good enough, not talented enough, not worthy of this stage, this tradition, this world. "We've got real singers coming in this afternoon," Denny continued, already walking toward the exit. "People who understand what country music is supposed to be. What you're doing, whatever that is, it's not music, it's a corruption. You're corrupting something pure with all that Negro rhythm and sexual suggestion. The Grand Ole Opry is a family institution. We don't need some Memphis greaseball coming in here thinking he can change what we've built over decades." The walk back to the dressing room was a blur. Elvis didn't count the steps this time. He grabbed his guitar case with numb fingers, avoided eye contact with the stagehand who tried to ask how it went, and stumbled out into the harsh November sunlight. The borrowed Plymouth sat there in the parking lot looking exactly as pathetic as Elvis felt. He made it to the driver's seat, closed the door, and that's when it all came crashing down. The tears came first as a tightness in his chest, then as a burning in his eyes, then as full body-shaking sobs that left him gasping for air. Elvis Aaron Presley, 19 years old, son of Vernon and Gladys, graduate of L.C. Hums High School, former employee of Crown Electric Company, sat in that parking lot and cried for 1 hour and 53 minutes. Not the kind of controlled, manly tears that were acceptable in 1954, but the ugly, snotty, gasping kind that came from having your deepest dream not just rejected, but mocked, belittled, and thrown back in your face like garbage. Every dream he'd ever had seemed to shatter in that Plymouth. The fantasies of standing on stage, of hearing his voice on the radio, of making his mama proud, of proving to everyone in Memphis that he was more than just another poor kid from the wrong side of town, it all crumbled into dust. Jim Denny's words played on repeat in his head. Someone like you. What did that even mean? Someone poor, someone different, someone who didn't fit into the neat little boxes that Nashville had constructed. Elvis thought about his father, Vernon, who'd spent time in prison when Elvis was 3, who'd never held a steady job for more than 6 months, who looked at Elvis's musical dreams with a mixture of confusion and concern. He thought about all the kids at Hums High who'd laughed at his pink shirts and his long hair, who'd called him names he didn't want to remember. He thought about the girl at the Crown Electric Company who'd said he was cute but weird when she thought he couldn't hear. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot when Elvis finally stopped crying. His eyes were so swollen he could barely see, his throat raw from sobbing. He sat there in the growing darkness, feeling emptier than he'd ever felt in his 19 years. This was supposed to be it. The Grand Ole Opry was the pinnacle, the place where careers were made. If Jim Denny said he wasn't good enough, then maybe he really wasn't good enough. Maybe everyone who'd ever doubted him was right. Maybe he really should stick to driving trucks. He started the Plymouth, the engine coughing to life reluctantly, and began the long drive back to Memphis. Somewhere around Jackson, Tennessee, he had to pull over again, not to vomit this time, but because he couldn't see through the fresh wave of tears. A highway patrolman knocked on his window, asking if he was all right, and Elvis had to lie, had to say he was fine, just tired, just needing a moment. The officer looked at him with something that might have been pity and told him to be safe. By the time Elvis pulled into the driveway of the small house at 462 Alabama Street in Memphis, it was past midnight. The lights were still on. Gladys was waiting, sitting at the kitchen table in her housecoat, a cup of coffee long gone cold in front of her. She took one look at her son's face and knew. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She just opened her arms, and Elvis collapsed into them like he was 5 years old again, scared of the thunder outside. They sat there at that kitchen table until the sun came up, Gladys holding her boy while he told her everything. Every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment of humiliation. When he got to the part about stick to driving trucks, Gladys's jaw tightened in a way Elvis had rarely seen. She was a gentle woman, his mama, but there was steel underneath that softness, forged from years of poverty and struggle and fierce love for her only child. Elvis Aaron, she said, using his full name the way she did when she wanted him to really listen. That man, that Jim Denny, he don't know nothing about nothing. You know what his problem is? His problem is that he can't see past his own nose. He's got this idea in his head about what music is supposed to be, and anything that don't fit in that tiny little box scares him. Elvis shook his head. Mama, he runs the Grand Ole Opry, he knows. He knows what worked yesterday, Gladys interrupted. But you, baby, you're tomorrow, you're something new, and new things, they always scare people at first. Always. You think anybody understood Hank Williams when he first started? You think anybody knew what to do with Sister Rosetta Tharpe when she picked up that electric guitar? She stood up, moved to the window, looking out at the Memphis sunrise. You remember when you were 13 and you wanted that guitar for your birthday? Your daddy wanted to get you a bicycle, said it was more practical. But I knew. I saw how you looked at that guitar in the store window. I saw how your whole face changed when you heard music on the radio. She turned back to him, and there was something fierce in her eyes. That feeling you got when Jim Denny rejected you, that burning in your chest, that ain't shame, baby, that's anger. And anger, when you use it right, is just another kind of fuel. Strong people, real strong people, they turn pain into power. They take every no and forge it into a watch me. Elvis wiped his face with the back of his hand. But what if he's right? What if I really ain't good enough? Gladys moved back to the table, took her son's face in her hands. Good enough for what? For his Grand Ole Opry, for his narrow little vision of what music should be. Baby, you wasn't put on this earth to be good enough for Jim Denny. You was put here to be Elvis Aaron Presley, and that's either gonna be enough for the world or the world's gonna have to adjust. Something shifted in Elvis's chest. The despair that had been sitting there like a stone started to transform into something else. Not quite hope, not yet, but something harder, something with edges. Gladys was right. Jim Denny had rejected him not because he wasn't talented, but because he was different, too much rhythm, too much movement, too much everything. "You know what you're gonna do?" Gladys asked. "You're gonna go back to Sun Records tomorrow, you're gonna talk to Mr. Phillips, and you're gonna keep playing that music that makes Jim Denny uncomfortable. Because if it makes him that uncomfortable, it means you're onto something." Elvis thought about Sam Phillips at Sun Records, the man who'd been the only one to give him a chance, who'd said he was looking for a white man who could sing with the feel and passion of a black man. Phillips didn't care about fitting into boxes. He cared about breaking them open. The anger was building now, not the destructive kind that burned everything in its path, but the kind that forged steel. Every dismissive word from Jim Denny became a piece of coal thrown into the furnace. "Someone like you, stick to driving trucks. Not music, it's noise." Each insult, each rejection, compressed under pressure until it started to transform into something else entirely: determination. Elvis stood up from the kitchen table, his legs steady for the first time since he'd walked off that Opry stage. "I'm gonna prove him wrong, Mama. I'm gonna prove them all wrong." Gladys smiled, the kind of smile that held generations of wisdom. "No, baby, you're not gonna prove nothing to nobody. You're just gonna be yourself all the way, no apologies. And that's gonna be enough to change everything." 8 months later, on July 5, 1955, Elvis Presley walked onto another stage. This time it was the Overton Park Shell in Memphis, an outdoor amphitheater where he was opening for Slim Whitman. The crowd was bigger than anything he'd played before, approximately 4,000 people spread out on the grass. But Elvis wasn't the same shaking kid who'd fumbled his way through that Opry audition. The rejection had done something to him, transformed him, refined him like fire refines gold. When he launched into "That's All Right," his body didn't just move, it erupted. Every swivel of his hips was a middle finger to Jim Denny. Every shake of his leg was a declaration of independence from the narrow confines of what music was supposed to be. The crowd went absolutely insane. Teenaged girls screamed so loud that Slim Whitman, the headliner, could hear it from his dressing room a quarter-mile away. But the real moment of vindication came 3 weeks later. Elvis was backstage at another show when his manager, Bob Neal, came running up with a newspaper. "You're not gonna believe this," Neal said, out of breath. There, in black and white, was an article about the changing face of American music. And there was a quote from Jim Denny himself, the man who'd told Elvis to stick to driving trucks. "I may have misjudged that Presley boy," Denny was quoted as saying. "What he's doing, it's not traditional country, but it's reaching audiences we've never reached before. The Opry might need to reconsider what we think country music can be." Elvis read the quote 3 times, his hands steady as rocks. He didn't feel vindication or satisfaction. He felt something deeper, a kind of cosmic correctness, like the universe had finally aligned the way it was supposed to. But even more interesting was what Denny said when a reporter cornered him 6 months after that, when Heartbreak Hotel was climbing the charts. "I was too limited to understand what I was seeing," Denny admitted, the words seemingly pulled from him like teeth. "I was so focused on preserving what we had that I couldn't see what was coming. That boy, Elvis, he wasn't corrupting country music. He was expanding it, creating something entirely new. I was dead wrong, and it was my limitation, not his." By early 1956, Elvis wasn't just successful, he was a phenomenon. He appeared on television on Milton Berle, Steve Allen, and eventually Ed Sullivan. Each appearance brought more screaming fans, more controversy, more proof that what Jim Denny had dismissed as noise was actually the sound of American culture shifting beneath everyone's feet. The same hip movements that Denny had called vulgar were now being imitated by teenagers across the country. The rhythm that was too Negro was breaking down racial barriers in ways that politics couldn't. The voice that couldn't sing worth a damn was selling millions of records. Elvis had taken everything that made him wrong for the Grand Ole Opry and turned it into everything that made him right for a generation desperate for something real, something raw, something that spoke to them in a language their parents didn't understand. But the most telling moment came in December 1957. Elvis was drafted into the Army, and before he left for basic training, the Grand Ole Opry, Jim Denny's Grand Ole Opry, invited him to perform, not to audition, to perform, as an honored guest. The same stage that had rejected him now wanted him desperately, needed him to maintain its relevance in a rapidly changing world. Elvis could have said no, could have thrown their invitation back in their faces the way they'd thrown his dreams back in his. But that wasn't who Gladys had raised him to be. He accepted, performed with grace and humility, and when Jim Denny approached him backstage, hand extended in what might have been apology, Elvis shook it without hesitation. "No hard feelings, Mr. Denny," Elvis said, and he meant it. Because without that rejection, without that moment of being told he wasn't good enough, he might never have found the anger to fuel his transformation from Elvis Presley, truck driver's son from Memphis, to Elvis, the king of rock and roll. The untold legacy of Elvis Presley isn't just about the music he made or the barriers he broke. It's about that moment in a parking lot in Nashville when a 19-year-old kid had to choose between accepting someone else's definition of his worth or creating his own. It's about understanding that rejection isn't failure. It's just someone else's inability to see what you see in yourself. Every legend starts this way, not on a stage in front of thousands, but in a moment of crushing defeat that becomes the catalyst for everything that follows. Muhammad Ali was told he'd never be a boxer because he was too pretty. Oprah Winfrey was fired from her first television job for being unfit for TV. The Beatles were rejected by Decca Records because guitar music was on the way out. Legends don't start as legends. They start as hopeful young people with a dream and the audacity to believe in themselves when nobody else will. They start with someone in a position of authority saying you're not good enough and responding not with acceptance but with a quiet, determined, watch me. The real untold legacy is this. Every single person who's ever changed the world started by being told they couldn't. Every innovation, every breakthrough, every moment of genuine human progress began with someone saying, that's not how we do things, and someone else saying, then maybe it's time for a change. When Jim Denny told Elvis to stick to driving trucks, he wasn't just wrong about Elvis. He was wrong about the fundamental nature of human potential. He believed that music, that art, that expression had to fit within predetermined boundaries. But boundaries are just invitations to those brave enough to cross them. The parking lot where Elvis cried for nearly 2 hours still exists. The Ryman Auditorium still hosts the Grand Ole Opry several times a year. But the world those institutions represent has been fundamentally transformed by a kid who was told he wasn't good enough and decided to prove that good enough was just another box that needed breaking. That's the untold legacy, not just of Elvis, but of everyone who's ever been rejected, dismissed, or told to stick to something safe. The legacy is that rejection isn't an ending. It's not even really about you. It's about the limited vision of the person doing the rejecting. And sometimes, just sometimes, being told you don't fit in is the greatest gift anyone can give you, because it forces you to stop trying to fit in and start figuring out how to stand out. Have you ever been told you weren't good enough? What did you do to prove them wrong?